So our last panel talked to you about getting a project ready, those steps we have to take before we make offers. This panel is going to take us to the next step in our process. We actually go and make those offers, acquire the property, and get that property clear of improvements so we can actually go and build a transportation project on it. So let me start off with you, David. You heard the last panel talk. Tell me, what is your main goal?
I think every right-of-way office, our primary function is to ensure that our projects meet the ready-to-let schedule. So that means that we need to have all of our properties in possession. We need to have our utilities adjusted in order to accomplish that ready-to-let date.
So you're trying to get projects in hand, utilities moved prior to that let date. That's that memo that Mr. Hale put out, our chief engineer put out, saying that we're not going to let projects unless we have all the right-of-way acquired, the utilities moved, railroad coordination done, and several other factors that might hold up the construction of a project. That's our goal, to get that ready to let. Let's go into some of those things that might, be those speed bumps along the way of us getting a project cleared for construction. And that first speed bump, that first hurdle that we in the right-of-way division have to get over is the environmental clearance. Tell me a little bit about how you're working in your district and what that environmental clearance means to you.
So, the environmental clearance, the previous panel really, kind of showed a great timeline of activities that need to take place. The right-of-way process is very fluid. There's a lot of activities that have to happen, and it's kind of like football, right? You've got your pregame activities, and then you've got once they've actually started the game. The game's really going to start once we've got environmental clearance. Our pregame is going to be all of the surveying efforts, our title work, our appraising of the properties to get everything ready to make an offer. The environmental clearance, that can be a very fluid item. What we are trying to do is engage our design teams and engage our environmental coordinators so that when new elements are identified through the development of the environmental document, or if there's a bump in the road and now there's an issue, well, how can that issue be addressed? Is that something that's going to necessitate delaying the environmental clearance, or is this something that you can go ahead, get your project environmentally cleared, and then address that item as a reevaluation? Our right-of-way team in the Austin District, we never tell anybody this is what has to happen. We partner with them and we try and say, listen, it would be, on this project, if this can be isolated to a reevaluation, that's probably going to be the wiser choice. Get that project environmentally cleared and let acquisition activities begin on any parcel not affected by that item needing that reevaluation. That's going to keep us marching forward. So, and I'm going to throw this question at you too, since Mr. Cannon threw it at me and I had the deer in the headlights look. About advanced acquisition. You're doing advanced acquisition on 2222 project in Austin. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that's going to help you get that project ready to let? Sure. So, I didn't know we were going to call it out by name. So we've got a project that has it's a little complex. It's an existing alignment, and then there's a new connector. So we run in two different CSJs. That new alignment, is a little bit behind. It was a little bit behind in the environmental clearance process, and we encountered a little bit of a bump with Fish and Wildlife. Just their time frame to complete what they needed was going to be a little bit longer than what we had originally gone to the public with. And this is a very congested area. It's a very important project to Austin. So once we knew there was possible legislation, it was being developed, and as it went through session and then it didn't get knocked down, we already had everything substantially completed. We were just waiting on all the responses for those environmental documents. Also, it was an ideal candidate because one of the projects had an independent utility, so it was going to be able to move forward regardless of what happened with the decision on the new connector leg. So it was a perfect synergy of, everything just came together and identified this as being a project that we know we had properties appraised, we had our title work ready, we were waiting because we had believed that environmental clearance was imminent. So the ability to utilize this new latitude really allowed us to maximize, not only on our time, time's the scarcest resource we have, but it also allowed us to conserve some funds because those appraisals that we had, well, we're able to go out and work on the appraisals we've already paid for as opposed to possibly waiting too long, having to reappraise everything, losing more time on that end as well. So it was a blessing that it came through.
So Guy, let me switch over and ask you some questions about negotiations. It used to be the case where we'd have a standing policy that we'd go out, knock on a property owner's door, make them an offer, and we get a counteroffer. And if that counteroffer was too high, we'd say thank you, we'll see you in court. Is that what we're doing today?
No, we're of course we're going out a little earlier than the negotiations. We're seeing people at the public hearing, finding out what their concerns are, letting them know what the positive aspects are of the project. And of course, as we get to where the owners are and as they're trying to make the decision whether to accept our offer or not, of course, we're allowing them to make a counteroffer. Counteroffers that we're doing now is more like enhanced negotiations, which we're working with a property owner, not only at the counteroffer, making sure that what he's asking for is valid, not just numbers pulled out of the air, but for us to be able to listen to, and but we're even up to the point of ED. We don't want to go to ED. We want to close by deed, but in the case we can't, we're moving toward dual path methods with doing an E49 at the same time as we're doing offers. So we're working with that property owner really at the very start of the project, letting them know what our processes are, working with them at the counteroffers and making sure that we're doing our due diligence, even Senate Bill 18, letting them know what their rights are, and continuing with the appraisal process. And of course, they may have another appraisal that they get for us to review. So we're working all the way through and trying to get the close by deed.
So, what Randy is asking is for us to clarify some of our right-of-way terms that we get stuck with using. ED, when we talk about ED, it's about eminent domain. That's where we have failed to reach a negotiated settlement with the property owner, and we're going to go through a legal process to acquire that property. And to do that, we have to engage the Attorney General's office and produce a form so that they know who to include in that case, called an E49 form. And I want to follow up with you on that, Guy, because you mentioned something in that although we're working with the property owner from the very beginning, and we're wanting to negotiate and we're wanting to get that property through a deed if possible. You mentioned that we're also still preparing to go through that legal process as soon as we can if we have to. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we're reaching out also to our legal team very early on, even as we get title commitments, as to what to look for, curative work that needs to be done to clear up the title, such as liens and whatnot. But the legal department plays a large part in what we do, making sure they're reviewing the field notes, parcel sketches. They're looking at all the parties that are involved, making sure we have the correct ownership and parties that will be actually together. Different interest, having different interest, people's interest in the property, making sure that we have everybody involved.
So, David, we're talking about legal resources. We have our right-of-way attorneys dispersed throughout the state. When are you engaging those folks who actually go through our trial process with us, the Attorney General's office? When are you engaging them on projects?
Well, every right-of-way project that we run, we have a kickoff meeting, and in our kickoff meetings, we try and bring the entire team together. That's everybody from our right-of-way consulting team, our survey, our engineering team, and our AGs are pivotal to that. We extend an invitation to the Attorney General's office. They've got their team broken down into regional teams, and it's not practical to expect them to send everybody that, every AG that covers our region in, but if they can send us at least one representative, and they've been great about doing that. They partner with us and they come in, and then they can go back and, we've communicated the number of parcels, we've communicated the priorities that we've got, and if we're not able to get possession through a negotiation, then they're aware of what our needs are, and they can help make sure they've got the right resources in place.
So, Guy mentioned we don't want to go to ED. We don't want to go through that legal process of eminent domain if we don't have to. And that's because we found it takes so much time. Basically, what we've found is in the past is that it takes us basically from the time we make a final offer to when we have a special commissioner's hearing that actually gets us possession of the property. It's about almost a year-long process. What tools do you have, David, that you've been using to alleviate that process? And I'm hitting at the PUAs here, the possession and use agreements. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, yes, we have the PUAs, and I'll talk about those. But we also have, as Guy hit, we have the enhanced negotiations, which is a great opportunity to resolve minor value disputes at a local level without seeing it need to escalate further. When that doesn't work out for us, then we do have our possession and use agreements. Our current program has been modified here in about the last year and a half to incorporate an addition. We now have added a little bit of value to a landowner to get them to consider it now by including a market rental for the early possession of their property. Previously, when the state approached a landowner with an offer and we were unable to negotiate a deed, we would we would ask them to take a possession and use agreement into consideration. And all that did was basically give them access to the acquisition funds a little earlier in the process. But there was no incentive on their end to give the state possession early for your roadway projects. So now this new pilot it's actually exited its pilot phase. It's active statewide, and it's been extremely successful. We had a very short fuse project in Austin. It was an interstate project with 28 parcels to bring into acquisition, and with less than a year, we had possession of all 28 parcels, and a large part of that was due to that possession and use agreement.
Yeah, we've been seeing those results throughout the state, really, where we've been able to get possession of parcels through a possession and use agreement about 130 to 180 days quicker than those that move through special commissioner's hearing and through the eminent domain process at minimal cost to us and to the state. So that's 180 days quicker, 130 days quicker that we own that property and we can start building our transportation project. That's 130 to 180 days quicker that the public can get on that roadway. So, Guy, I want to kind of switch over to you, and let's start talking about those parcels that are hard for us to acquire. I know you've been working on a big project there in Abilene, and you've had some difficult parcels there, and they have to do with that oil and gas. Tell me about acquiring a parcel that has a oil rig on it.
Well, as far as in my career, I've seen a lot of things, and some that were very difficult, some that were easy. I'd never, in my career, been tasked with actually having an oil well in the way, and having that to be able to move, and then stay on schedule for the let date, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. Let me begin by saying, as far as working with the project manager, trying to provide excellent customer service between us and the districts is so critical in these areas, and them understanding what we're doing and how we're going about this. The reason of the difficulty too, we're reaching out to other state agencies. The Railroad Commission is involved. We're reaching also to our legal department, which is assisting us as far as, telling us what we can and can't do, and what's going to be the easiest for us. So we basically checked to see the reserves on this particular well, to see if the reserves could be bought out. But the thing was that it was at such a magnitude, the well had to be moved. So we did it by the process of X parcel, which we could do in acquisition. And the way that we did this with this private company is the communication that we had was just with one person with that other company, which, kind of held down the noise so you weren't getting a lot of distortion of what people were trying to do. As far as legal teams, our legal team was involved with theirs as to the acceptability of terms, how the process was going to work, and making sure that we had purchase agreements, knowing what the state requirements were. So the legal teams were working on that as well. We worked with them as far as the progress on a spreadsheet, knowing where they're at, what they were going to do at each well pad, location, utilities as far as flow lines, things that you really wouldn't suspect. Some things are not necessarily available. In other words, in an older producing oil field, you have flow lines that you can't detect. You have fiberglass lines. You'll have lines that polyethylene lines that have no detector tape on it. A lot of these lines were abandoned. So the search to go on to get all this information to be able to put the new roadway in was pretty daunting task. So we were able to get a new well drilled. The new well drilled as the old one was still going, as to not have to pay for storage for oil that was being produced. The old well we capped as per the guidelines of the Railroad Commission, who worked with us, and we moved it successfully. We did it in 9 months. So it was incredible, the amount of effort that went into it.
Yeah, that's a pretty successful encounter of a oil and gas rig. We've been encountering these across the state more recently, and they've slowed up a lot of projects. And they're something that's difficult for us to acquire because they cost a lot. And we have to make a determination whether or not it costs more to pay the oil and gas company to re-drill a well somewhere else and slant drill under onto our property, or to just buy out the mineral reserves. And do that, we have to hire oil and gas engineering experts who have the expertise to do that, and then they have to take that information and give it to an appraiser who has to convert that into an appraisal of the fair market value of the property. And then we get to take that and present it as an offer to an oil and gas company who is very conscious of their bottom line, very conscious of how much things are going to cost them, and that's very likely a parcel that is going to go through the eminent domain process. We've also recently discovered some things like the oil and gas well doesn't have to be on the property that you're buying. If it's within 115 feet of the right-of-way, they can't operate safely. So we have to then make that same determination. So our best advice, if you're going through an oil and gas well, is to stay away from them. And if you can't do that, yeah, and we'll get to other ones, Randy. And if you can't do that, then plan enough time into your schedule so that we can go through these processes and procedures to get all these things lined up and in order. Yes, sir.
Quick question on that, with regard to the experts there. State policy, generally speaking, is limited to $150 an hour. Some of my own experiences in Houston know the rates to hire people, those subject matter experts, to be $450 to $500 an hour, which is justifiable given the circumstances.
Right. So what Gary Ray is pointing out for us is that these oil and gas experts that we have to hire, they don't come cheap. They are experts. They have to be willing and able to testify in a hearing against the oil and gas company, which becomes a problem because many people in that industry want to work for those oil and gas companies, so they don't want to testify against an oil and gas company. So you have to find somebody who is retired or out on their own, and they don't come cheap. We just recently worked on a large oil field out in the FAR district, and we had experts hired, and we mediated that case before we even got to the trial, to the eminent domain section, and we had spent over $150,000 in expert fees. So they are expensive. David, let's talk about other parcels that are difficult to buy. Tell us about some of those things you've encountered in the Austin district that give you some trouble.
Well, as Randy pointed out, cemeteries need to be avoided like the plague. You also want to make sure that you can identify as early as possible if you've got any federally held properties. The post office that was referenced earlier is a classic example. Beyond that, there are other less obvious issues that we look for. If you've got large-scale operations that are going to be impacted, then you're going to have to factor in time to relocate an operation. And then on top of that, you're going to have to include an additional lead time for demolition. And, we've also got those biologic species that affect when you can do your demolition work. So, you've got ownership problems. If you've got deceased owners, and you're going to have to try and go out and find the unknown heirs of a deceased property owner. So there's, there really is quite a bit that can go in to complicate things. Then throw on top of that, billboards and, their lobby and the special provisions and how we have to address them, and the likelihood that that's going to throw some innocent-looking parcel into an eminent domain action.
And I understand you recently had an encounter with a cell tower?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we had a real trifecta parcel because, this project's infamous now. We had the 28 parcels. We got it in possession, but we had one parcel on the corner of an interstate and a U.S. highway that was developed with a 3-story hotel, a cell tower, and a billboard. And so by the time, we're still finalizing the transfer of title, but there were 7 different legal firms involved on the landowner side because property was held by an LLC with 3 SECs, each with their own attorneys because they were in their own litigation internally. Then the cell tower was owned not by a utility but by a private proprietor who leased space to 3 eligible utilities that needed certain considerations before they would release their leasehold interest. And then there was the billboard. So, we've got the billboard clear to the right-of-way. We've got the hotel down, and we're finalizing everything on the cell tower. But the thing that really is hard to predict is where the trouble's going to come from. You'd think with that many, you'd look to the cell tower and say, oh, that's going to be the death knell. No, it wasn't the cell tower, and it wasn't the hotel. We had this situation, ready to go. But the billboard, even though they had been compensated for the value of their structure and removed it from the right-of-way, had a lease. And that lease instrument created a cloud on title. And we need, the state can't have any property that's encumbered. So we lost the opportunity to close this one through negotiations because of a billboard lease.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that you can't tell how long it's going to take you to acquire a piece of property just by looking at it. You can get a good idea about what's built on it, but when you start digging down into the ownership, you might have a corner clip that's only 800 square feet that was in somebody's family who died, 100 years ago without a will, and the successful owners after that all died without a will, and you have 900 people to go find and determine who might be the heirs of this family. So you can't just look at a piece of property and figure out how quickly you're going to get it. We got about 5 minutes left. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Well, with regard to the environmental clearance, what would be your perceived impact to a utility doing lateral adjustments in an area where they already obtained some form of property clearance? So in other words, we know that environmental clearance would impact the utility doing longitudinal work, but what about its crossing? Would they be able to undertake an adjustment in advance of TechDOT actually obtaining environmental clearance?
I do not believe so. I think it's pretty clear. We've talked to FHWA several times about this, and they have been pretty clear. No turning dirt before environmental clearance. No movement.
Distinction, I think he's asking.
Is it
where the utility has property right in the right of way as opposed to being in our right of way by permit? Is it?
Yeah, and I don't think that's what makes a difference. I think it's, are we turning dirt out there for a project? And if they're relocating for our project, then that has to be underneath the environmental document. So, Mr. Janicki, you had a question?
Yeah, the property that you acquired where you had the replacement well, did you have to prepay some of the proceeds for him to initiate the operation?
Yes, what was the question? Would you say it again, please?
So the question, can you repeat the question again, Mark?
I'm sorry.
When you had to do the replacement well, did you prepay some of the proceeds so that they could initiate the drilling operation? Was that prior to the acquisition?
So the
Right.
question was, did we prepay some of the proceeds to the oil company so they would initiate the operation of re-drilling the well?
And the answer to your question is yes. And the reason we worked with the oil company as far as where they would like to see it put. We knew it had to be out of our right of way. They had to find a proper place, also, close to the tank battery where they could, be able to utilize their well efficiently and also have, ingress, egress out of there. And that was part of our legal team's efforts, as what they needed, and how that would work. It may be on a case-by-case basis, but yes, we did.
Guy, remind me if I'm right, did we use a possession and use agreement to do that prepayment as the mechanism? I think we did, but I'm trying to recall.
Yeah, we used a purchase agreement.
Purchase, okay. Anybody else? We have time for probably one more question.
I want to ask real quick, you said the state can't buy a property that's encumbered. How does that play out like a home where they owe more on the home than the home's worth? Is that complicated as well?
If we can't negotiate it out, we're going to have to go to eminent domain regardless. So I would expect that if a property owner was upside down on a mortgage and they're going to, ask for additional funds in acquisition, the debt service they have is not really going to be applicable to what the value of the property is. So that one's going to be a pretty clear, we might be able to, entertain. Well, that's an interesting question because when we look at a possession and use agreement, part of our new possession use agreement, in addition to paying them a market rental for early possession, we can authorize a percentage up to 100% of their approved value for the appraisal. So it's a risk-based analysis that we're making, so we would take a look, on each and every parcel, we would look at what's the appraised value, what's the remainder value, what's the quality of title, and decide what's the risk to the department. How much, if any, it could be 0% and just the market rental for the early possession if you've got an upside-down property where the remainder value doesn't have enough to cover.
All right, we have to wrap up here. If y'all need further clarification, get with these guys in the break or afterwards.